the thing is as well, I think because one of the things that we felt was really important when we were trying to set it up was about trying to get that message across of basically if it's paid, what we're doing is basing it on cost of production. We're trying to. That's one of the things we need to keep working on. But the idea is that based on cost of production, and when you sort of sit there and you're talking to a buyer who you're at the very beginning who we're trying to bring on board, and they say, oh, you know, any chance that we can get some of the prices down, like we're really interested in this, but it's a bit too expensive. And we would be like, well, there's a bit of negotiation. If you can't pay the amount that it costs to produce it, then we won't produce it, because basically what you're saying is they should be paid lower than you. And you kind of say it in a nicer way than that, obviously, but it is about saying these people only get paid, we get, you know, because we take the same wage, and kindling is we only get paid minimum wage. So if you're saying you can't pay the cost of production, then you have to have a little bit of a think about, you know, the cost of food and stuff. And it's interesting if you say it a little bit more gently than that and smiling a lot, then they do get it, people get it. So I think that's one of the reasons, especially the initial buyers that came on board are totally committed to that, and they go, wow, actually we're part of a fair food system, we're trying to create a fair food system. And I think that's a really interesting thing, which leads me on nicely. So in this bit I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we set it up, because some of the questions that Cara sent me, first of all, were things like what are the essential skills, and how did you get in touch with your market, and what sort of institutional support did you get, are they the ones I'm starting with, and just sort of resources. So in terms of basically to start with, in terms of the kind of who was involved in it and what those skills were, at the very, very start when kindling, when we first started talking about it, we had no skills and no people that knew anything about it at all. But we did quite a lot of research, and we kind of got in touch with, we knew the growers, because if you're kind of in that scene in Manchester, you kind of all know each other anyway. But sort of, I suppose now, but maybe that's because we did Manchester, I don't know. But anyway, we kind of knew some of them, so we kind of got in touch with them, went and did volunteering with some of the growers and all that sort of thing. But yeah, it did take quite a lot of research, but luckily we've written all that up. So in terms of things that we learned from different groups around the country and all that sort of things, and problems that they faced and all that kind of thing. So, you know, our hope is that we can make that a bit easier for everyone else by just going here and have our stuff that we can. So obviously you're welcome to all that. But then once we started looking into it and talking to a lot of growers, and once this informal group started getting together to look at how to coordinate, just how to stop growing the same things and how to be better at supplying the box scheme and unicorn and stuff, we then found that we had a room of really great skills and resources and people. And basically what we had, and I think what's really important to have if you can, and it sounds really obvious, maybe it's just totally obvious, but it's the producers, because then you have the stuff to sell in the first place, but you also know a bit of what is possible, you know, what can you grow in the northwest in the first place and all that sort of thing, and seasonally what can you expect to give people and volumes and all that kind of thing, like, so you're starting on the right footing. In terms of the market, when we kind of originally, the people we talked to, they didn't end up buying through the co-op because they already had the contact with the growers and they already were buying sufficient quantity, whereas the restaurants couldn't buy enough to buy direct from growers. So, but what we had was kind of we had an understanding of the market by having buyers on board. And also because one of the buyers was box scheme and had worked for bigger box schemes as well, we had all of the logistical, or a bit of an understanding of the logistical side of things. So, you know, how long does it, it sounds ridiculous, but it's one of those things when you're starting off, it's like, oh, how many rounds can you fit in the space, the very narrow space that all the buyers give you to deliver in, or whatever, you know, everything between 6 and 7 or whatever. So, you know, kind of knowing all that stuff. You are? Not that bad. Yeah, obviously. But yeah, so just kind of having that information was really key, and then having time, basically. So when we went and approached that small group that was just starting to have a bit of a chat about it, we kind of said, we've just done loads of research, do you want it? Do you want us to run some focus groups? So that's what we did. I think we did like meetings once a month. I would say try and not start them at this time of year because it's just impossible for anyone to get to them. But people got to them, and the other thing is that people really needed it. Like the growers really needed another market, so they needed to come to those meetings really, but they were also very committed to a wider picture of creating a more sustainable food system. So I think really it's those sort of skills and that knowledge, but then also that commitment to wanting to change something on a bigger scale. In terms of the market, once we realised that it wasn't going to be through, that it didn't make sense for it to be going through the same market that already existed through Unicorn and the box schemes, we then basically got in touch with restaurants and caterers that we thought would be interested, which sometimes was right. So kind of other co-ops, if there were little, cafes that were co-ops, or people that had a really strong we source locally thing, which although they didn't always particularly want to buy from us or talk to us. But and then I can't remember who else, but just people we knew, and we kind of just got in touch with them and said, this is what we're doing, it's right at the beginning, are you up for this?
Can I just ask what was the best way of actually getting in touch with them?
I think we emailed them and then rang them and then just said, we want to come and see you. And smiled a lot and sat and talked a lot. But people were generally, because it was just sort of an idea, it was funny because people were quite into the idea of chatting to us. They sit down and talk to us. Once you sent them the first price list, some of them weren't. Some of them were just like, whoa, this is too much. Whereas some of them were. And the other thing that worked, for us in developing it at the beginning was that right at the beginning when we were talking about feeding Manchester, when we were setting that up, we went and talked to the local authority caterers, who we thought would not be interested at all in even talking to us, because there's this whole thing of 1p extra on every meal costs us £75,000 across Manchester and blah, blah. So we weren't even going to talk to them, and someone said do. And what we happened to find was someone who was massively enthusiastic and wanted to get Food for Life bronze for the whole catering and blah, blah, blah. So she said, yeah, I'm really up for it. And we ended up doing a bit of work with them where we did a pilot, and we put a sustainable soup on the menu every day for a year with just one little primary school, which was a totally ridiculous project to do for Manchester Veg people, and that quite often they wanted half a cabbage. Or, like when you think about it at the time, you're like, wow, that's a brilliant idea. And then you think about it, it's like you're starting off with 25 children's portions, which are like tiny. They're tiny around there. It's like, eat more children. And so you try to bring up the chef. And also it was mad because like at certain times there really isn't anything to, so I'd be bringing up, like the thing to do if you ever do that is take them all to the pub at the beginning, go to the pub with the chefs, call them chefs rather than cooks, and go to the pub with them and have a chat with them, and it was just lovely, and we got on really well. And then I could ring them up and go, guess what I've got again this week? And they go, kale, and I'd be like, yay. Kale soup, Sandy all got on very well, it's lovely. But in terms of the actual that year logistics, I mean, luckily they were Dig Food, we did it through Dig Food because the box scheme was happening, they were delivering fruit anyway, so it worked, we managed to make it work. But yeah, sometimes the farmers were a bit like, you're joking, like you want a cabbage again, and it's like, sorry. But what then happened, and they didn't carry on sourcing from us for loads of different things, I'll come back to at the end, but they didn't end up carrying on buying through Manchester Veg people. However, the university heard about it through that. And when we first sat down and talked to the university, because we also wrote a report called Sustainable Fare, which was looking at public procurement issues, blah, blah. So when we sat down with the university, they went, so we hear you've done a pilot project with the local authority caterers, therefore you've obviously passed all the, I probably shouldn't say this on film, anyway, therefore you've passed all the, health and safety, blah, 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 and you've got this experience. We were just sat there going, yeah, this is like, they never looked at that at all about us, and they were just like, brilliant, well, and they had none of the obstacles that everyone else has of like, because they were just like, we want to do it, we're going to find a way to do it, and they did it, and it was brilliant. And so we basically got one of the first big buyers that has carried on being a big buyer, working with us really well from doing that first thing. So it's funny, I suppose what I'm saying is things come up that you're not quite sure where it's going, but it can work out. And it also means that, again, so Kate mentioned working with Stockport, Kindling are working with them to help them change their menus to make them lower carbon, but the idea is that we've said we want them to start buying from Manchester Veg people as part of us doing that. So yeah, that's kind of the buyers thing, and then Kate will talk about how that built up a bit. But basically, at the beginning, there was a lot of workers us going out there looking for them, and at times it was just like, oh my god, who else? Who can we ask? And you kind of sit there thinking, I don't want to talk to them about the membership bit or whatever. But then actually now they're coming to us from various different things, from the tweets, I don't know about Twitter, and various different things that come to us. So it's great. It's really changed. The growers we already had on board. I guess you're going to talk a bit about the expanding the thing and all that. So in terms of the institutional support, we didn't actually, we were contracted to do that bit of work for them, but in terms of Manchester Veg people, the local authority didn't kind of help them. And really what happened with the institutions was that they came, you know, the university came on board as a buyer. And I think they've been really supportive and lovely, but, you know, as they should be as a member of the co-op in a sense, but they've been great. But the local authority didn't, they paid for us to do a bit of research and paid for a pilot, you know, kind of low cost but high value, I thought. So none of that. We did have, we were supported by the Making Local Food Work programme, which has ended sadly. Yeah, I mean, in terms of resources, you do need them. You either need people that are up for spending a lot of their time doing it, because the meetings that we had, so in these monthly meetings, we would get together and go, okay, it would be talking about what structure do you want, how do you want people to be involved, what's the joining process, like we had like these various themes that had come up as issues from the national research that I did of these different projects, and they were saying, you know, what you have to do is make sure you get your structure right, because otherwise it will cause loads of problems. So talking about weird issues, in the beginning you'd be like, all right, I know you don't want to think about if you all hate each other at some point or if some enormous problem happens, but imagine in 20 years' time, if you all don't know each other, then imagine what would happen if this conflict arose or whatever. So you would go into quite big things just to make sure you had membership agreements that actually deal with things before they get to problems. So we did a lot of that, basically, and we facilitated that. All of that is written down in the write-up that we've done of it, so which you can all have, and that's fine, that's not there on the website. Yeah, I think that is the document down the level. Yeah. So yeah, I'll hand back over to Kaylee, but then we'll come back to the sort of wider picture at some point.